Hey guys, welcome back to the show. If you look, I'm way down here. I'm now right here in the city of Rome. Would you believe it? Rome, Italy, by the way. And I thought this was a great backdrop for us for the show today, because I'm calling the show today A Dude Named Paul. Now, if you don't know about this guy named Paul, in the Catholic Church they call him an apostle. But I want to share some thoughts with you about this guy named Paul, who didn't turn out the way I think he thought he was going to turn out, and certainly not the way that history has caused him to turn out. Let me just kind of give you a little background on this guy named Paul. Well over 2,000 years ago, there was a guy named Saul, S-A-U-L. Saul, who was born in faraway land, and he was raised Jewish. He was raised of a sect of Judaism that was very strict in their beliefs. And he was trained to believe that the Jewish faith was the only faith that there was to believe. So he was raised in an environment where they had, they were small g gods. So he was surrounded by the culture of Rome, and Rome had enveloped many parts of the world by then. But then there came a day when Saul was put in a position, he earned a position, where he was criticizing and attempting to kill these new believers in what was called Christianity, that was called that years later. In fact, they viewed it as a cult back then. So there came a time when Saul would literally hold the coats of those people that were murdering these Christians. So there came a day when Saul was challenged to change his beliefs. Now remember, he was raised in an environment that he was surrounded by royalty, he was surrounded by people with power, and Saul had a measure of power. So he one day came to a situation, I'm not going to get into the whole nuts and bolts of the whole story right here today, but his whole belief system was turned upside down. So he changed his name from Saul to Paul, S-A-U-L, to Paul, P-A-U-L. And this is kind of where I want to focus on the show today. So if you wanted to put a subtitle on the show, I would call it Seize the Day. So let me share with a silly story. A young man and his commanding officer got on a train together, and the only available seats were across from an attractive young woman who was traveling with her grandmother. And as they engaged in pleasant conversation, the soldier and the young woman kept eyeing one another. Now the attraction was obviously mutual, and suddenly the train went into a tunnel, and the train car became pitch black. Immediately, two sounds were heard, the smack of a kiss and the whack of a slap across the face. The grandmother thought, I can't believe he kissed my granddaughter, but I'm glad she gave him the slap he deserved. The commanding officer thought, I don't blame the boy for kissing the girl, but it's a shame that she missed his face and hit me instead. The young girl thought, I'm glad he kissed me, but I wish my grandmother hadn't slapped him for doing it. As the train broke into the sunlight, the soldier could not wipe the smile off his face. He had just seized the opportunity to kiss a pretty girl and slap his commanding officer, and had gotten away with both. Now that young soldier knew how to seize the opportunity. In the same way, we have to take advantage of every opportunity that comes our way to fulfill our purpose in life. So my question, I'm going to have several questions for you here today, but what is your primary purpose for this life? If you look around you right now, you see all these buildings that were built for a purpose. They were built by people with a desire, with a blueprint, if you will. And I think a lot of us go through life without a blueprint in life. We just assume that things are going to happen to us instead of creating the life that we really want to achieve. One of my favorite authors lived well about 100 years ago. His name is Orison Swett Marden. He said, there's no greater sight in the world than that of a person fired with a great purpose, dominated by one unwavering aim. I go back to what Saul did. Saul had one unwavering aim, and that aim was to stomp out this new group that challenged the Jewish culture called Christians. In fact, over in a book that, or a letter actually, that Paul authored years later, he said in a book called Philippians, chapter 3, he says, I have not achieved it, but I focused on one thing, forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead. Forgetting the past and looking for what lies ahead. Now that's easier said than done, especially for those of us who have baggage. I don't know about you, but I have quite a bit of baggage in my life. Now Saul had a considerable amount of baggage because he had the responsibility and frankly the guilt of realizing that he had people murdered. He had people killed because he chose to follow what he was taught that he thought was the right thing back 2,000 some years ago. So he had all this regret, is a good word. And Paul had to understand that in order for him to move toward the things that he was designed to do from that point forward, his struggle was to forget what was in the past. I don't know about you, but that's really hard for me to do, maybe for you too. Because he had to go through a situation where, in fact, he says in another part of the Bible, he says that he was always chasing the prize. And in this culture, in the Roman culture and also in the Greek culture, that they had these Olympic Games and they had these people that would strive to, their award was a wreath that they would put on their head. That was their award for being the best of the best. So Paul used this analogy that he had to keep striving for what was ahead of him. So I'm thinking, for Paul, it's like, are you joking? Paul teaches us this concept that we must forget about our stupidity and forgive ourselves from the mistakes that we've made in the past. And I happen to think, this is my opinion totally, that I wonder if Paul carried that guilt with him for the rest of his life, that regret of hurting people to the point of killing people or having people killed as a result of what he thought was the truth at that time. And I think if you look at people throughout history, you realize that there are people who have literally changed the way they behave because they've come to an aha moment. I'd like to ask you today, have you come to an aha moment in your life where you were challenged to be changed as a result of that aha moment? And for me, there's been several aha moments. There was a time back in 1988 where a gentleman named Joe and a gentleman named John, they were challenged to hire me in a certain job that I've never done before. In fact, I was scared of my own shadow back then. And they believed in me at a time when I didn't believe in myself. And I wonder if you and I would choose to hang around people that would believe in us more than sometimes we believe in our own selves. Paul said, after he became a Christian, a believer in Jesus Christ, he then decided, and you can read his works in the New Testament of the Bible, that he decided that he wanted to know God more. That he wanted to understand this being, this power that was able, at least in his own mind, to do the extraordinary. In fact, a guy named F.B. Meyer, who lived about 50, 60 years ago, he wrote this. He says, we may know God personally, intimately, face to face. He says, Christ does not live back in the centuries nor amid the clouds of heaven. He says that he is near us. So Paul was in a situation where he was challenged to change his thinking about what God was, which was in his mind, when he was taught, some foreign being, to a point of understanding that maybe he could have a personal relationship with God. So he had to literally transform his thinking. Let me kind of backtrack a little bit in this story. Before Saul, remember he changed his name to Paul, when Saul was newly challenged to change his way of thinking, he had a situation where he was blinded for a few days. And there was a guy that was prompted to go see Saul. Now, this guy that was prompted or had a desire to go, or maybe was told to go see Saul, knew of Saul's reputation. And remember, Saul's reputation was he murdered people. He had people killed for, in essence, turning their backs on Judaism and embracing this new religion called Christianity. So this guy went back and forth. He says, do I really want to go talk to this guy Saul, because he could have me killed? So eventually, over a period of a short amount of time, he decided to go see this guy named Saul. Some stuff happened, some conversation happened, which enabled Saul to see the light, literally, to recover from his blindness, that created a pattern for his life that he could not have even imagined years prior. But he had to look at things differently. And I think that you and I, in order for us to embrace new opportunities in our lives, then we have to look at things differently. And looking at things differently are not always easy, because sometimes when you look at things differently, it challenges you to forget the stuff that you thought was true. How many times haven't you been in relationships, or maybe you were raised in a certain way that you were taught that certain things were true, when in reality, if you really look at the depths of what you were taught, maybe there are some major gaps in that belief system that maybe wasn't so true at all. Another question for you today is, what choices do you make daily because of the negative forces that are around you? Or what have you chosen to forget, like Paul had to do, to press toward the things that are waiting for you to embrace? That's been, I think, very difficult for a lot of different people. What makes you embrace certain things? What makes you buy certain things? What makes you desire certain things? I can remember there was a TV show years and years ago called The Equalizer, and this character in this show, The Equalizer, drove a Jaguar. And for years and years and years and years, I wanted a Jaguar. Now, I wouldn't mind if somebody gave me a Jaguar, but I don't think I'm going to go out and buy a Jaguar. But at that time, in that culture, at that age I was, back in the 80s, in 90s, I think the show was on, I really, really, really wanted that Jaguar. So oftentimes, the culture that you and I are in dictate our desires. Again, the culture that we live in dictate our desires. If you look at what's around me, this is Rome, and if you try to imagine yourself living back 2,000, 2,500 years ago in this environment, how differently you would believe. There's some things that you believe now that you evolved into, that you decided to embrace over a period of time. But if you look back at maybe your youth, your childhood, why would I believe certain things when you knew after the fact that it wasn't true at all? There was an advertising slogan that I read some time back. It said, quote, "We create ideas that inspire enduring belief." Again, we create ideas that inspire enduring belief. Now, this is the same company that created the markets for Frosted Flakes cereal and Heinz ketchup. Think about that a minute. In fact, Kevin, a guy named Kevin, he talks about in one of his books, he says, you feel the world through your five senses, the brands that can move you to an emotional level that can create loyalty beyond reason. What I'm trying to say here today in a few different ways is that Paul had to have his own mind rewired in order to embrace a lifestyle that he could not have imagined prior to an event in his own life. And if you stop and think about your own life, there have been events in your life that have transformed your belief system in a way that you could not have imagined prior to that event. Let me share a piece of a story. There's a book that was out in the 90s called Who Moved My Cheese? Who Moved My Cheese? It was written by a guy named Dr. Spencer Johnson. And in the book, Who Moved My Cheese, it's a story of two little people and two mice. And yes, it's a fable, it's a story. But the two little folks and the two mice lived in this maze, and their goal was to have some cheese. Of course, mice like cheese. So there came a time when the cheese supply started to get low. Again, this is from the book, Who Moved My Cheese? And the two little people, Hem and Haw, decided to wait around and not to go looking for new cheese, even though they saw that the volume of the cheese started to deplete over a period of time. Well, the mice, their names were Sniff and Scurry. Yes, that's intentional, Sniff and Scurry. They decided to go hunting for new cheese. And if you read the book, it's a real quick read. It's a great little book, Who Moved My Cheese? You can see that Sniff and Scurry eventually found new cheese. But Hem and Haw were getting thinner and thinner. They were losing weight because they thought that certainly somebody was going to bring them new cheese. Well, generally speaking in life, people don't bring you new cheese. You have to go out and hunt for it. You have to go find it. You have to get out of your comfort zone. And that's exactly what Paul did in the New Testament of the Bible. Now, as Paul decided to embrace this new religion, this new faith, he decided to mentor people that he was going to try to duplicate himself in other parts of the area. So Paul, decided to start building churches in what is now known as Turkey, the country of Turkey back then. So one of his students was a guy named Timothy, and Timothy was a young man, and the majority of people that were around Timothy were older than him, that were scholars, that were really, really smart people. So there came a time in one of his letters to Timothy, Paul's letters to Timothy, was he said, in essence, my paraphrase, he says, don't let the old folks look down upon you because you're young. And I sometimes think that you may have been challenged by people that are either older than you, more experienced than you, maybe they're smarter than you, maybe they know more than you. So you think that you can't bring anything to the table because you don't think that you have material information, enthusiasm, guidance, whatever adjective you want to add to this, that could benefit these people that are older, smarter, more intelligent than you. Paul was trying to encourage Timothy here to not allow what he didn't have, that is his age and experience, to get in the way of what he did have. And what Timothy did have was passion. He had a desire to serve. He had a desire to do the right thing. And in my world, in my experience, passion oftentimes supersedes experience many, many times over. Eva Young writes, to think too long about doing a thing often becomes its undoing. Again, to think too long about doing a thing often becomes its undoing. Eventually, she says, we must exercise judgment and take action despite uncertainty and incomplete information. Leaders must avoid the extreme, listen, of paralysis by analysis. And I think sometimes you and I have fallen into that from time to time, that we think that we have to have everything lined up perfectly before we take steps forward to do some extraordinary things in our lives. How do you think all this got built? It didn't just show up overnight. No, it started on the foundation. It started below ground, didn't it? It started below ground. They started building a foundation, and then they started building these structures over time. Now look again, what's behind me, what has happened since in the last 2,000 years? Degradation, apathy, destruction, lack of maintenance has happened. Thieves have come in and taken a lot of stuff away. Wars have happened and have destroyed things in this part of the world. And if you translate that over to your own mind, what have you allowed to happen in your own mind that kind of resembles this as a metaphor of what's going on in your own life, that you've allowed time, you've allowed people, you've allowed situations, you've allowed lack of investment in your own mind for things to collapse over a period of years and years and years again. Because you and I, just by default, We take the easy way. We really do. It's easy not to maintain. It's easy to stop building things that need to be built up in our own lives. Paul talked about that a lot. He says that you need to build yourself up. He talked about that more than a few times. In fact, he talked about it in several places in the New Testament of the Bible, that he tried to get through to his followers and his readers that we have to be proactive about building ourselves up. So oftentimes, at least I read in my own studies, that people that achieve some really good stuff have more passion than the people that maybe have all the answers that are waiting for stuff to happen in their own lives. Let me share a quick story. On New Year's Day, 1929, Georgia Tech was playing California. Late in the second quarter, Roy Riegels recovered a fumble for California, and in his excitement, became confused and began running in the wrong direction. After racing 65 yards, he was finally tackled by his own player at the California 2-yard line. California attempted to punt from deep in their own end zone, but the kick was blocked, and Georgia Tech scored a safety. In the locker room at halftime, Roy sat in the corner with his face buried in his hands, crying. The room was silent. The coach didn't make his usual halftime speech, but shortly before the team was to take the field for the second half, he said, quote, "The starting team is going back onto the field to begin playing the second half." The whole team left the locker room except for Roy, who remained in the corner with his face in his hands. He says, "I can't do it, coach," he said. "I can't play. I ruined the team." The coach said, "Get up, Roy. The game is only half over and you belong on the field." Think about that in your own life. When you decide to get up, when you do something stupid, and we've all done some stupid stuff. I do stupid stuff more times than I care to share with you. I mean, I've done some really, really stupid stuff. What you do after the stupid stuff determines everything. I'll say it again. What you do after you do the stupid things matters. It really impacts the rest of your life. Again, I'll go back to what Paul went through and did some really horrific things to other people. So he could have allowed those horrific things that he did to other people to impact his future in a permanent way. And if you stop and think about your own life, maybe you didn't have people murdered, but maybe you murdered their character. Maybe you talked about them behind their back without knowing the facts. Maybe you assumed certain things about people that were not based in fact at all. Maybe you made excuses for your own incompetence instead of looking in the mirror and realize that, you know what, I need to get my crap together in order to change my life in a positive way. So you could go through a whole list of stuff that maybe you should have done better, but you've chosen to tear other people down from time to time, certainly not every day, but from time to time, without having all the answers. And then you decide to make excuses for your own mediocrity. I've done it. I think you've probably done it too. You criticize everybody else around you, but you make excuses for your own incompetence. Something's wrong with that picture. So you have to you have to make a decision for yourself every day to make the best play every single day. Rick Warren said, he says, "We're a product of our past, but we don't have to be a prisoner of it." Again, we're a product of our past, but we don't have to be a prisoner of it. I was bullied in school. I was beat up in school. I got in fights in school. I was harassed in school all the time. I could tell you some stories I won't, but it's embarrassing to even tell you the stuff that I went through in school. Because I was the oddball of the bunch. I didn't hang with the crowds. I didn't do the things that the other kids did. So I was the blunt of their anger, their frustration, their rage. But could I allow that to stop me from doing some extraordinary things in my life? It did for a long time, for quite a few years, several years, actually. I wonder if you're similarly in the same boat. You're stuck in this rut because other people have looked at you in a certain way and they've judged you in a certain way, and you haven't gotten out of your own way to do things that are considerably beyond your comfort zone, because of what other people have said and done to you. I'm asking you today that if you want to live a life that's extraordinary, then you have to decide to make the decisions in your own life that are there, that's going to push you beyond what you're comfortable with every day. That's been my struggle. I'll be very candid with you. Stuff that I really want to do, I don't do because I'm afraid of that I'm going to fall on my face. But I keep reading about all these people that have achieved great things in their life. They fall on their face over and 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 over again. But every time they fall on their face over and over and over again, they keep getting back up and keep making minor adjustments until what was once difficult, what was once a struggle, enabled them to build an empire that is extraordinary, that will be around for a very long time. So I'm asking you today to keep getting back up, to, as Paul suggested in the Bible, to forget all the mistakes you've made in the past, because you've made a ton of them, like I have, and to press toward the goals and the dreams that you have in your life that can produce a life that is beyond your imagination. Because you can do it. I believe in you. I know you can do it. My name is John Carver, and I appreciate you watching the show, and I'll be back real soon. Thanks so much.